The notification appeared at 2:47 a.m., a soft blue glow piercing the darkness of Maya's bedroom. She'd left her phone face up on the nightstand, a habit her mother constantly criticized, and the preview text made her stomach clench with a familiar mixture of curiosity and dread. Group chat. The inner circle Jess. She's our little social experiment. Maya's hand trembled as she reached for the device, her curly hair catching the moonlight streaming through her apartment window. The message thread continued below, but the preview cut off there, leaving her suspended between knowing and not knowing. Between the life she thought she was living and whatever truth lay hidden in those words. She would later mark this moment as the precise instant her world began to unravel. 3 months earlier, Maya Chin had believed herself the luckiest graduate student at Northwestern University. After 2 years of academic isolation, buried in her psychology dissertation on social manipulation and group dynamics, she'd finally found her tribe. Jess Hartwell, with her effortless blonde waves and trust-fund confidence, had approached Maya in the campus coffee shop on a rainy October morning. The memory played in Maya's mind with crystalline clarity. She'd been struggling with her laptop, her research notes scattered across a corner table, when Jess materialized beside her like some perfectly curated Instagram post come to life. "You're Maya, right? From Professor Davidson's research methods seminar?" Jess had smiled with practiced warmth. "I've been watching you absolutely demolish every discussion point this semester. Mind if I join you?" Within an hour, Maya found herself invited to lunch. Within a week, she was seamlessly integrated into what Jess called the Inner Circle, a carefully curated group of graduate students who seemed to effortlessly balance academic excellence with an enviable social life. The circle consisted of 6 members: Jess, the unofficial leader with her marketing psychology focus; Connor Walsh, a tall, brooding sociology PhD candidate who specialized in urban community structures; Priya Patel, studying educational psychology with an infectious laugh and designer everything; Marcus Rivera, whose communication studies research on media manipulation made him surprisingly insightful about human behavior; Emma Jo, a quiet but sharp anthropology student who observed everything; and finally Maya herself, welcomed into their exclusive ecosystem like a missing puzzle piece finally found. They met every Thursday at Brewster's, a trendy coffee shop near campus where the baristas knew their orders by heart. Maya always ordered the same thing: a large coffee with oat milk and 2 sugars, something that had somehow become a running joke among the group. They teased her about her predictability, her methodical note-taking, the way she unconsciously twirled her curls when concentrating. "Our little scientist," Jess would say with affectionate amusement. Always analyzing everything. Maya had basked in the attention and feeling seen and valued after years of academic loneliness. These people understood her dedication to research, her late-night library sessions, her passion for understanding human behavior. They included her in their weekend plans, invited her to dinner parties at Jess's Lincoln Park apartment, made her feel like she belonged somewhere beyond the confines of her sterile graduate corral. The teasing about her appearance had started gradually, so subtly that Maya almost didn't notice at first. Comments about her wild, curly hair, suggestions for straightening treatments, offers to help her with her style. Jess had even bought her a silk pillowcase for Christmas, claiming it would help with frizz control. Maya had laughed along, grateful for friends who cared enough to help her navigate social situations she'd never quite mastered. She'd grown up in a small town outside Chicago, the daughter of immigrant parents who prioritized academics over social skills. Her mother, Dr. Lee Chin, was a chemistry professor at the local community college, and her father worked as an accountant. They'd raised Maya to value intelligence and hard work above all else, leaving her somewhat unprepared for the complex social dynamics of graduate school. The Inner Circle seemed to fill that gap perfectly. They taught her about fashion brands she'd never heard of, introduced her to restaurants she couldn't afford, included her in conversations about cultural references that had previously sailed over her head. In return, she helped them with research methodology, statistical analysis, and provided a sounding board for their academic ideas. It felt like a fair exchange. It felt like friendship. Maya's research specialty in social manipulation should have made her more aware of the subtle dynamics at play, but she'd been studying theoretical frameworks, not living them. The irony wasn't lost on her now, in the harsh light of hindsight, but at the time she'd been too grateful for acceptance to analyze the mechanics too closely. The group had rituals and inside jokes that made Maya feel privileged to be included. They had a shared Google Doc where they tracked funny things each member said, a private Instagram account for group photos, and a text chain that buzzed constantly with plans, gossip, and academic stress relief humor. Or so Maya had thought. As autumn shifted into winter, the group's dynamics became more established. Jess clearly held the most social power, with her connections to wealthy alumni and her family's influence in Chicago social circles. Connor served as her lieutenant, using his working-class background and academic credibility to bridge different social groups. Priya functioned as the group's emotional barometer, always ready with encouragement or celebration. Marcus brought cultural cash and media connections. Emma observed and documented, her anthropological training making her an ideal chronicler of group behavior. And Maya? Maya was the brain trust, the research expert, the one who could analyze and explain the very social phenomena they navigated daily. She'd felt useful, valued, intellectually appreciated in a way she'd never experienced before. The first crack in this perfect facade had come 3 weeks ago, during final season. Maya had been working 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination, when she'd overheard a snippet of conversation in the graduate student lounge. Emma and Priya had been discussing weekend plans, and Maya caught her own name in their exchange. Maya probably wouldn't want to come anyway. You know how she gets about social stuff. True. Plus, the dress code might be challenging for her. Maya had felt a strange chill at the casual dismissal, the assumption about her preferences made without consulting her. But when she'd approached them moments later, both women had greeted her with their usual warmth, asking about her research progress and offering study session snacks. She dismissed the conversation as a misunderstanding, a moment taken out of context. After all, they were her friends. They'd proven it dozens of times over the past 3 months. The second crack had appeared just last week, when Maya discovered she wasn't included in a new group chat that Connor had mentioned during their Thursday coffee meetup. He'd referenced plans made in the other thread, then quickly changed the subject when he noticed her confusion. Oh, that's just logistics stuff, Jess had explained smoothly. Super boring coordination for Marcus's birthday party. We didn't want to spam everyone with venue details. But Maya had helped plan Marcus's party, had contributed money for his gift, had spent hours researching the perfect restaurant recommendations. Why would she be excluded from the logistics? Again, she'd pushed down her discomfort. Paranoia was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when she was so close to finishing her dissertation, not when she'd finally found a social group that accepted her academic intensity. Now, staring at her phone screen in the blue-tinged darkness of her bedroom, Maya realized she'd been willfully blind to a pattern that should have been obvious to someone with her training. The casual exclusions, the subtle put-downs disguised as helpful advice, the way conversations sometimes stopped when she approached, all of it painted a picture she'd been too invested in her belonging to see clearly. The text thread continued below the preview, and Maya knew that reading it would fundamentally change everything. Knowledge, once gained, couldn't be unknown. Truths, once revealed, couldn't be buried again. She thought about her parents, who'd always warned her that academic achievement wouldn't automatically translate to social success. She thought about her younger self, awkward and isolated, dreaming of the kind of sophisticated friendship she'd thought she'd finally found. Maya took a deep breath and opened the message thread. The messages loaded in reverse chronological order, newest to oldest, creating a backwards narrative that made Maya's heart pound with increasing intensity. Jess, 2:45 a.m., she's our little social experiment, and honestly, the results are fascinating. Connor, 2:43 a.m., did you see her face today when we were talking about spring break? Pure confusion. Classic outsider response. Priya, 2:41 a.m., I almost feel bad, but then I remember how much she corrects people in seminars. Like girl, we get it, you're smart. Emma, 2:38 a.m., the hair thing is getting old though. How many times can we suggest she do something about it before it becomes mean? Marcus, 2:36 a.m., it's not mean if we're helping her. Besides, the whole point was to see how malleable social behavior is under group pressure. Jess, 2:34 a.m., exactly. And she's been the perfect subject. Isolated background, desperate for acceptance, intellectually arrogant but socially insecure. Textbook case. Maya's hand shook as she scrolled deeper into the conversation history. The messages went back months, creating a horrifying parallel narrative to what she'd experienced as genuine friendship. Connor, November 15th, update on Project Maya. She bought the pillowcase Jess suggested and actually thanked us for caring about her hair health. The compliance is incredible. Emma, November 10th, anthropological observation. Subject has begun mimicking group speech patterns. Yesterday, she used literally 3 times in one sentence. Previously never observed this linguistic choice. Priya, November 3rd, she keeps offering to help with everyone's stats homework. It's like she's trying to prove her worth through usefulness. Fascinating insecurity response. Marcus, October 28th, media manipulation theory in action. We've successfully convinced her that her natural presentation is unprofessional, and she's actively seeking our approval for changes. Jess, October 20th, Phase 1 complete. Subject fully integrated and dependent on group validation. Ready to move to Phase 2. Maya felt physically sick as the timeline of her manipulation unfolded in stark text messages. Every kindness had been calculated. Every piece of advice a tool of control. Every moment of inclusion part of a larger experiment in social engineering. She scrolled further back, to the very beginning of the thread, created just days before Jess had accidentally approached her in the coffee shop. Jess, October 3rd, found our test subject. Maya Chin, psychology PhD, specializes in social manipulation. Ironic, right? Perfect combination of smart but naive, lonely but proud. Connor, you're in Davidson's class with her. What's your read? Connor, October 3rd, definitely isolated. Sits alone, doesn't participate in study groups, seems to have zero social connections outside academic contexts. But she's sharp as hell, might be harder to manipulate than usual subjects. Emma, October 4th, challenge accepted. From an anthropological perspective, isolated academics are actually more susceptible to group influence when acceptance is offered. They have higher social motivation due to previous exclusion. Priya, October 4th, educational psychology confirms this. Students from immigrant backgrounds often struggle with social integration, making them ideal candidates for belonging manipulation. Marcus, October 5th, this could be perfect for all our research projects. I need data on media influence. Emma's studying group assimilation. Priya's looking at educational belonging. Connor's examining class dynamics. Maya could be our multidisciplinary case study. Jess, October 5th, exactly my thinking. Plus, my marketing psychology thesis needs data on consumer behavior modification through social pressure. Maya's spending habits and style choices could provide months of material. Connor, October 6th, one concern, she's studying social manipulation herself. Won't she recognize what we're doing? Jess, October 6th, that's what makes this perfect. Academic knowledge of manipulation theory doesn't protect against emotional need for belonging. If anything, her intellectual arrogance will make her think she's too smart to be manipulated. Emma, October 7th, ethical considerations? Jess, October 7th, we're not hurting her. If anything, we're helping her develop social skills she clearly lacks. Win-win scenario. Marcus, October 8th, plus, think about how much she'll learn about human behavior from the inside. It's like a masterclass in applied psychology. Priya, October 8th, and we'll have incredible data for our respective projects. This could make all our careers. Jess, October 9th, then it's decided. Operation Maya begins tomorrow. I'll make contact at Brewster's. She has a standing table there every morning according to my reconnaissance. Maya set the phone down with trembling hands, her entire worldview crashing around her like a house of cards in an earthquake. Every memory from the past 3 months recontextualized itself through this new lens of understanding. The warmth she'd felt at being included, the gratitude for their advice, the slow changes she'd made to her appearance and behavior, all of it had been orchestrated with scientific precision. She was a lab rat who'd thought she was a friend. The worst part wasn't the manipulation itself, though that cut deep enough. The worst part was how perfectly they'd read her, how accurately they'd predicted her responses, how completely they'd understood her psychological vulnerabilities. Everything they'd written about her was true. She was lonely, desperate for acceptance, intellectually arrogant but socially insecure. She had been the perfect subject. Maya walked to her bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection in the harsh fluorescent light. Her curly hair, which she'd begun straightening twice a week based on the group's suggestions, hung limp and chemically processed around her face. She'd bought new clothes with money she couldn't afford, changed her coffee order to something more sophisticated, even altered her speaking patterns to match the group's casual eloquence. They'd remade her in their image, and she'd been grateful for the privilege. But as Maya stared at her transformed reflection, something harder than hurt began crystallizing in her chest. These people had underestimated one crucial aspect of her personality. Her analytical mind didn't just accept data, it examined it from every angle. They'd been so focused on manipulating her emotions that they'd forgotten she was, as Jess had dismissively noted, sharp as hell. If they wanted to treat her like a research subject, she could play that game too. Maya returned to her bedroom and opened her laptop, creating a new document titled Counter-Analysis: Ethical Violations in Graduate Student Research Practices. If her former friends thought they could use her for their academic advancement without consequences, they were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong test subject. She began typing, her fingers moving with the precision and purpose that had carried her through 2 years of doctoral research. But this time, she wasn't studying theoretical frameworks of social manipulation. She was documenting a real-world case study with herself as both researcher and victim. The inner circle had taught her valuable lessons about human behavior, just not the ones they'd intended to impart. They'd shown her exactly how academic ethics could be twisted to justify personal gain, how emotional manipulation could be disguised as friendship, how intellectual arrogance could blind people to their own moral failures. Maya smiled grimly as she worked, her analytical mind already mapping out the next phase of what had suddenly become a very different kind of experiment. Maya spent the rest of the night conducting the most important research of her academic career. She screenshot every message in the thread, documented timestamps, cross-referenced the conversations with her own journal entries from the past 3 months. Her graduate training in research methodology had never felt more personally relevant. By dawn, she had constructed a comprehensive case study that would make any ethics committee's collective blood pressure spike. The inner circle had created a textbook example of research misconduct, complete with lack of informed consent, psychological manipulation of a vulnerable subject, and potential violations of university policy on human subjects research. But Maya's plan went deeper than simple academic justice. She made coffee, her original order, large with oat milk and 2 sugars, and settled back at her laptop. Phase 1 of her counter-experiment required careful character analysis of her manipulators. If she was going to outmaneuver them, she needed to understand their individual psychological profiles as thoroughly as they'd understood hers. Jess Hartwell emerged as the clear orchestrator, a marketing psychology student whose family wealth had insulated her from most consequences throughout her life. Her messages revealed someone who genuinely believed she was helping Maya while simultaneously viewing her as inherently inferior. Classic narcissistic altruism, the delusion that manipulation was mentorship. Connor Walsh, the working-class sociology student, seemed motivated by a combination of academic ambition and resentment toward what he perceived as Maya's intellectual privilege. His comments carried undertones of class-based hostility disguised as scientific observation. Priya Patel's educational psychology background made her contributions particularly insidious. She'd weaponized her knowledge of belonging theory to deliberately exploit Maya's cultural outsider status. Her messages showed someone who understood exactly how harmful their actions were, but rationalized them as academically valuable. Marcus Rivera's media manipulation expertise explained the sophisticated nature of their campaign. He'd applied communication theory to control Maya's information environment, carefully curating what she knew about group dynamics and social expectations. Emma Zhou's anthropological training made her the group's documenter and observer. Her messages revealed someone intellectually curious about human behavior, but ethically detached from the human cost of their research. Maya realized that each member brought specific expertise to the manipulation, creating a multidisciplinary approach that would have been impressive if it weren't so morally bankrupt. They'd essentially formed an academic crime syndicate, with Maya as their unwitting victim and unwilling research subject. But they'd made one crucial error in their analysis of her personality. They'd conflated social naivety with intellectual weakness. Maya might have been desperate for belonging, but she was also a doctoral candidate in psychology with a specialty in exactly the kind of manipulation they'd practiced on her. Time to remind them why she'd earned her place in graduate school. Maya began crafting her response strategy with the same methodical precision she brought to her dissertation research. The key was patience. Revealing her knowledge too early would allow them to minimize the damage or construct a defensive narrative. Instead, she would gather additional evidence while appearing to continue as their unsuspecting subject. Her phone buzzed with the daily good morning message from Jess, the same artificially cheerful tone Maya now recognized as performative emotional labor. Jess, morning sunshine. Coffee at Brewster's at 10? I found this amazing article about hair care routines that I think you'd love. Maya stared at the message, feeling the familiar mixture of hurt and anger. Even now, knowing the truth, part of her still craved the acceptance these people had dangled like a carrot. The psychological manipulation had been effective precisely because it targeted her genuine emotional needs. She typed back with careful casualness, "Sounds great. Looking forward to it." But this time, Maya would be the one conducting research. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that split the difference between her original style and the changes the group had encouraged. Maya wanted to appear compliant enough to avoid suspicion while subtly testing their responses to minor deviations from their prescribed image. Brewster's buzzed with its usual morning energy when Maya arrived, 10 minutes early as always. She chose their regular table and ordered her original coffee combination, a small act of rebellion that felt disproportionately meaningful. Jess arrived precisely on time, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She wore designer athleisure that probably cost more than Maya's monthly grocery budget, and her smile was as practiced as ever. "You look great today," Jess said, sliding into the seat across from Maya. "I love what you've done with your hair." Maya had done nothing with her hair except wash it, but she smiled and nodded. "Thanks. I've been trying some of those techniques you suggested. It shows. You're really coming into your own style-wise." Jess pulled out her phone and angled it toward Maya. "Mind if I take a quick pic? The lighting in here is amazing." This was new. Maya didn't remember Jess ever wanting to photograph her before, but she nodded agreement. As Jess snapped several photos, Maya wondered if they would end up in the research documentation, visual evidence of their subject's transformation. The conversation proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes, discussion of upcoming assignments, gossip about professors, complaints about winter weather. But Maya found herself listening with new ears, parsing each comment for layers of meaning she'd previously missed. When Jess suggested they meet Emma for lunch later, Maya agreed while mentally noting the coordination. When Connor texted the group chat about weekend plans, Maya observed how the conversation flowed around her rather than including her. When Priya shared academic stress about her thesis, Maya offered help while recognizing how her usefulness was being leveraged. The most telling moment came when Jess casually mentioned a new study she'd read about social influence in academic settings. "It's fascinating how environmental factors can shape behavior," Jess said, stirring her oat milk latte. "Like, people think they're making independent choices, but really they're responding to social pressures they don't even recognize." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That's the core of a lot of manipulation techniques, isn't it? Making the target believe they're in control while actually directing their choices." "Exactly." Jess's enthusiasm seemed genuine, apparently missing the irony of discussing manipulation theory with her current victim. "The most effective influence is invisible to the subject." "Fascinating," Maya replied, taking careful notes in her mental research journal. "I'd love to read that study sometime." They parted ways with plans to meet the full group for dinner that evening, and Maya spent the afternoon planning her next moves. She had confirmation that the experiment was ongoing, evidence that they were documenting her transformation, and insight into their belief that she remained completely unaware. Perfect conditions for a controlled counter-experiment. Maya's phone buzzed with activity throughout the day, messages from various group members checking in, making plans, maintaining the illusion of friendship. She responded to each with appropriate enthusiasm while documenting the patterns of communication. By evening, she had a clearer picture of how the group coordinated their manipulation. They used multiple communication channels, the main group chat that included Maya, several smaller threads that excluded her, and individual conversations where they shared observations and planned interventions. The dinner location was Jess's apartment, as usual for their weekend gatherings. Maya arrived with a bottle of wine, a nicer vintage than she'd normally buy, another small change the group had encouraged in their campaign to upgrade her social presentation. The apartment itself was a testament to financial privilege, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lincoln Park, modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine, and a kitchen equipped with appliances Maya couldn't afford to dream about. It was the kind of space that made clear statements about social position and cultural capital. Everyone else had already arrived when Maya appeared, creating a slightly awkward moment of group attention that she now recognized as manufactured. They probably coordinated their arrival times to create this exact dynamic. Maya as the last to arrive, slightly off balance, grateful for their patient welcome. "Maya," Priya called out with performed excitement. "Perfect timing. We were just talking about spring break plans." Maya settled into the conversation, listening to discussions of European vacations and family ski trips that existed in an economic reality completely foreign to her experience. She contributed appropriately, asking questions and expressing interest, while internally cataloging how the group used these conversations to reinforce class boundaries and social hierarchies. The evening proceeded with the same careful orchestration Maya now recognized in all their interactions. Topics were introduced and guided, conversations were steered toward predetermined conclusions, and Maya's responses were observed and noted with academic precision disguised as friendly attention. But the most revealing moment came during dessert, when Emma casually mentioned a documentary about social psychology experiments. It's about this researcher who convinced people to do things they'd never normally do, just through group pressure, Emma explained. The subjects had no idea they were being manipulated until afterward. Ethical nightmare, Connor added with apparent concern. Informed consent is supposed to prevent exactly that kind of exploitation. True, Marcus agreed, but the knowledge gained was valuable. Sometimes research requires methods that aren't conventionally comfortable. Maya watched the exchange with growing clarity about how the group justified their actions. They convinced themselves that their manipulation was academically valuable, that Maya's unwitting participation served a greater scholarly purpose, that their superior understanding of psychology gave them the right to treat her as a research subject rather than a human being. It was a masterclass in rationalization, and Maya documented every word. As the evening wound down, Maya volunteered to help with cleanup, another behavior modification the group had encouraged through subtle social pressure. While stacking dishes in Jess's designer kitchen, she overheard the beginning of a conversation from the living room. The behavioral changes are really accelerating now, Emma's voice carried clearly through the open floor plan. The style modifications, the spending pattern shifts, even the way she speaks. The conversation cut off abruptly when Jess noticed Maya might be listening, but Maya had heard enough. The experiment was entering a new phase, and her unwitting cooperation was no longer optional. Time to reveal that their test subject had been conducting her own research all along. Maya made her move the following Thursday, during their regular coffee meeting at Brewster's. She arrived early and chose a different table, one with better acoustics and sight lines, positioned to prevent easy exit or private sidebar conversations. Details that her training and research methodology had taught her to consider now applied to social warfare rather than academic inquiry. She ordered her original coffee combination and settled in to wait, her laptop open to what appeared to be dissertation work, but was actually her comprehensive documentation of the group's manipulation campaign. Screenshots, timeline analysis, behavioral observations, and theoretical framework applications, everything needed for a devastating academic exposé. The inner circle arrived together, which was unusual. Typically they staggered their entrances, creating the illusion of casual individual choice rather than coordinated group behavior. Maya noted the change as potentially significant. Either they were escalating their experiment or something had shifted in the group dynamics. Maya just called out with her usual performed enthusiasm. We have amazing news to share. They arranged themselves around the table with practiced ease, and Maya observed how they'd unconsciously created a formation that placed her in the psychological position of being addressed by the group rather than participating as an equal member. What's the news? Maya asked, matching their energy level while mentally preparing for whatever development they'd orchestrated. We've been selected for a graduate student research showcase next month, Connor explained. The psychology department wants us to present our collaborative work on social influence and group dynamics. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Collaborative work? We've been documenting some fascinating data about behavior modification through peer influence, Priya added with barely contained excitement. The university is really interested in our findings. Of course, we'd love for you to be part of the presentation, Emma said with careful diplomatic language. Your insights as someone who's experienced the effects firsthand would be invaluable. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted Maya to help present research based on her own manipulation, to stand before an academic audience and discuss her transformation as if she'd been a willing participant rather than an unwitting victim. Maya took a slow sip of her coffee, buying time to control her emotional response. This was the moment she'd been preparing for, the perfect opportunity to reveal her counter-research. That sounds fascinating, she said with measured calm. I'd love to hear more about your methodology and findings. The group exchanged glances, subtle communication that Maya now recognized as coordination behavior. Jess took the lead, sliding into what was clearly a prepared presentation. Well, We've been studying how environmental social pressure can influence individual behavior modification, particularly in academic settings where belonging motivation is high. We identified a subject who fit specific psychological criteria, Marcus continued, and created controlled conditions to test various influence techniques. The results have been remarkable, Emma added. Measurable changes in appearance, spending behavior, social presentation, even linguistic patterns. Maya nodded thoughtfully, projecting engaged academic interest while her anger built to controlled fury. Fascinating research design. Tell me about your informed consent protocols. The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Maya watched as the group processed her words, their expression shifting from confident presentation to growing uncertainty. Well, just began carefully. The nature of the research required naturalistic observation conditions. So no informed consent, Maya clarified. No institutional review board approval. No ethical oversight of any kind. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Connor cleared his throat and attempted recovery. The subject benefited from the interventions. Personal growth, improved social integration, enhanced self-presentation skills. The subject, Maya repeated slowly. Interesting terminology. Almost dehumanizing, wouldn't you say? Priya shifted nervously in her seat. Maya, if you're concerned about the ethical implications. Oh, I'm very concerned about the ethical implications. Maya opened her laptop and turned the screen so the group could see her comprehensive documentation. In fact, I've been conducting my own research on this topic. The change in group dynamics was immediate and dramatic. 5 faces went pale in synchronized horror as they recognized screenshots of their private messages, timeline analyses of their manipulation campaign, and detailed behavioral observations documenting their coordination tactics. You see, Maya continued with academic precision, I specialize in social manipulation psychology. It's my doctoral research area. So when I discovered your private group chat 3 days ago, all of it, dating back to your initial planning phase, I decided to conduct a comprehensive case study on the psychological profiles of graduate students who engage in unethical research practices. Emma was the first to find her voice. Maya, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding at all. Your messages were quite clear about your intentions. She's our little social experiment. Perfect combination of smart but naive, lonely but proud. Academic knowledge of manipulation theory doesn't protect against emotional need for belonging. Should I continue quoting your assessments of my psychological vulnerabilities? The group sat in stunned silence as Maya methodically dismantled their false pretenses. She pulled up specific screenshots and read their words back to them, watching as each member realized the extent of their documented misconduct. The most interesting aspect of my research, Maya continued, has been observing how you rationalized ethical violations through academic justification. You convinced yourselves that manipulating an unwitting subject was acceptable because the results might be scientifically valuable. Classic moral disengagement theory in action. Just attempted to regain control of the narrative. Maya, we never intended to hurt you. Everything we did was designed to help you develop socially. Help me. Maya's voice cut through the coffee shop noise like a scalpel. You systematically manipulated my appearance, my behavior, my spending habits, and my social presentation while documenting my compliance for your academic advancement. You treated me like a lab rat and called it friendship. The devastation on their faces would have been satisfying if Maya hadn't been so genuinely hurt by the depth of their betrayal. These people had identified her loneliness and social insecurity, then weaponized those vulnerabilities for their research projects. Here's what's going to happen, Maya said, closing her laptop with decisive finality. You're going to withdraw from the research showcase presentation. You're going to delete all documentation related to your unauthorized study. And you're going to hope that I don't decide to file formal ethics complaints with the university. Maya, please, Priya whispered. This could destroy our academic careers. You should have considered that before you decided to destroy mine, Maya replied. The only reason I'm not reporting this immediately is that I need time to decide whether public exposure would serve justice better than private consequences. She stood to leave, then paused for one final observation. For what it's worth, your research methodology was fundamentally flawed. You assumed that intellectual knowledge of manipulation creates immunity to emotional manipulation. But you failed to account for the possibility that your subject might be more analytically capable than you anticipated. Maya shouldered her bag and looked at each member of the group one final time. I trusted you. I believed you were my friends. That makes me naive, not stupid. The difference is crucial, and it's why you're going to lose this particular game." She walked away from the table, from the coffee shop, and from the life she'd built around their false friendship, leaving 5 graduate students to contemplate the wreckage of their academic careers and moral integrity. The immediate aftermath of Maya's confrontation unfolded with predictable desperation. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from various group members, apologies, explanations, bargaining attempts, and thinly veiled threats about mutual academic destruction. Maya read each message with detached interest, adding them to her growing file of evidence while considering her next strategic moves. The most revealing communication came from Jess, whose privileged background apparently hadn't prepared her for consequences she couldn't buy or charm her way out of. "Jess, Maya, I understand you're hurt, but let's be rational about this. We're all academics here. We can work out a solution that benefits everyone's career trajectory. Jess, think about what you're risking by making this confrontational. Your reputation matters too. People will ask why you didn't recognize the manipulation sooner. Jess, we could collaborate on a paper about this. You could be first author. Turn this whole situation into academic gold for both of us." Maya almost admired the audacity. Even facing exposure, Jess was still trying to manipulate her, still convinced that the right combination of incentives and threats could control Maya's response. It revealed a fundamental inability to recognize that their victim had developed genuine agency. The other messages followed predictable patterns. Connor attempted working-class solidarity, claiming they'd both been outsiders trying to succeed in an elitist academic system. Priya appealed to cultural understanding, suggesting that immigrant students needed to support each other. Marcus offered professional connections and research opportunities. Emma proposed anthropological collaboration on studying their own group dynamics. Each approach revealed the sender's psychological profile and professional insecurities while demonstrating their continued inability to process Maya as anything other than a resource to be managed. Maya deleted the messages without responding. Silence was more psychologically destabilizing than engagement, and she wanted the group to marinate in uncertainty while she made her final decisions about their academic futures. She spent the weekend reviewing university policies on research ethics, consulting with her advisor about hypothetical scenarios involving graduate student misconduct, and researching precedents for similar cases in academic literature. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and sobering. Dr. Sarah Chen, Maya's dissertation advisor, was a sharp-eyed professor in her 50s who specialized in research ethics and had served on multiple institutional review boards. During their Monday morning meeting, she listened to Maya's hypothetical scenario with growing concern. Student researchers manipulating an unwitting subject without informed consent or IRB approval would face serious consequences, Dr. Chen said carefully. Potential sanctions could include academic probation, suspension from research activities, or even dismissal from graduate programs. The university takes research misconduct very seriously. She studied Maya's face with the practiced assessment of someone who'd mentored dozens of graduate students through various crises. "Maya, if this isn't entirely hypothetical, you should know that you have institutional support for reporting such violations. The university has clear protocols for protecting research subjects who've been harmed by unethical practices." Maya nodded, absorbing the information while maintaining her facade of academic curiosity rather than personal investment. But Dr. Chen's next words cut straight to the heart of her internal conflict. "However, you should also consider the broader implications of formal complaints. Academic communities are small, and public ethics violations tend to have lasting consequences for everyone involved, including the victim who reports them. Sometimes the whisper network can be as damaging as official sanctions." The warning was clear. Pursuing justice might cost Maya her own academic future, regardless of her victim status. The same social dynamics that had made her vulnerable to manipulation could work against her in seeking accountability. Maya spent Tuesday conducting her own informal investigation, reaching out to other graduate students who'd interacted with the inner circle. What she discovered was a pattern of behavior extending beyond her own situation. Sarah Kim, a first-year PhD student in developmental psychology, had been briefly courted by the group before being dropped when she proved too socially confident for their purposes. David Martinez from the sociology department had been recruited for his statistical expertise, then excluded from social activities once his academic usefulness was exhausted. Jennifer Wu had been invited to several gatherings but found herself subtly discouraged from returning after she questioned some of the group's assumptions about cultural hierarchy. Each conversation revealed the same calculated approach: identify psychological vulnerabilities, offer targeted social rewards, extract what value they could, then discard or manipulate as needed. Maya had simply been their most successful long-term project. The pattern clarified Maya's decision. This wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was systematic predatory behavior that would continue unless stopped. Other students deserved protection from becoming future research subjects in the inner circle's academic advancement schemes. Wednesday morning brought unexpected developments. Maya arrived at her graduate corral to find Connor Walsh waiting in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Maya, please. Just 5 minutes." She considered refusing, then decided that observing his approach might provide useful data for her continuing analysis of the group's psychological profiles. 5 minutes, she agreed, unlocking her office door. Connor entered and immediately launched into what was clearly a rehearsed appeal. "Look, I know we screwed up. Massively. But Maya, think about what reporting this will do to all of us. Jess's family has connections throughout the academic world. If this becomes public, she'll make sure it reflects badly on everyone involved, including you." The threat was delivered with desperate conviction, revealing Connor's genuine fear of social and professional consequences. But it also demonstrated his continued misunderstanding of Maya's position and motivations. "You think I'm worried about Jess's family connections?" Maya asked with genuine curiosity. "Connor, you systematically documented my psychological vulnerabilities and exploited them for academic gain. You treated me like a lab animal. And you think I'm concerned about social consequences?" "I'm trying to protect you here," Connor insisted. "You don't understand how these things play out in academic politics. The victim doesn't always come out looking sympathetic, especially when there's money and influence involved." Maya studied his face, noting the combination of genuine concern and manipulative calculation. Even now, attempting damage control, Connor was trying to manage her response through fear and dependency. "Connor, let me explain something about my psychological profile that your research apparently missed," Maya said with clinical precision. "I don't respond well to threats. They tend to make me more determined rather than more compliant." She opened her laptop and showed him her comprehensive documentation of their group's activities. "I have screenshots going back to your initial planning phase. I have timeline analysis of your manipulation techniques. I have behavioral observations of your coordination tactics. I have testimony from other students you've targeted. And I have professional consultation on the ethical and legal implications of your research methods." Connor's face went ash gray as he processed the scope of Maya's counter-investigation. "The only question," Maya continued, "is whether I pursue this through university channels, professional ethics boards, or public exposure through academic publications. Your attempt to intimidate me through Jess's family connections just helped me decide. Maya, please. Your 5 minutes are up." Connor left looking like a man walking to his execution, and Maya felt the first genuine satisfaction she'd experienced since discovering the truth about her friends. Not because she enjoyed his fear, but because she'd finally reclaimed agency in a situation designed to render her powerless. Thursday brought the group's final attempt at damage control. Maya arrived at Brewster's for what would be her last coffee meeting to find all 5 members waiting at their usual table, arranged in formation like defendants facing judgment. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in failed crisis management. Jess attempted to take control through financial incentives, offering to fund Maya's research and conference presentations. Connor tried emotional appeals based on shared outsider status. Priya invoked cultural solidarity and immigrant community responsibility. Marcus offered professional networking opportunities. Emma suggested collaborative research projects that would benefit everyone's academic careers. Each approach revealed their continued belief that Maya could be managed through the right combination of rewards and social pressure. They genuinely could not comprehend that their victim had developed genuine independent agency and moral clarity. Maya listened to their presentations with detached fascination, mentally cataloging their techniques for future research on academic manipulation and power dynamics. When they finished their coordinated appeal, she delivered her final assessment. "You're making the same fundamental error that undermined your original research," she said with clinical objectivity. "You're assuming that understanding someone's psychological profile gives you the right to exploit it. You're treating human agency as a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be respected." She gathered her materials and stood to leave. "I've made my decision about reporting your research misconduct. You'll find out the results through official university channels, just like any other research subjects would." Maya walked away from Brewster's for the last time, leaving 5 graduate students to face the consequences of treating human beings as experimental variables rather than complex individuals deserving of dignity and respect. 3 weeks later, Maya sat in Dr. Chin's office reviewing the university's response to her formal ethics complaint. The investigation had moved with surprising speed, aided by Maya's comprehensive documentation and the testimony of other affected students who'd found the courage to speak up once someone else broke the silence. The sanctions were severe but appropriate. Jess faced suspension from all research activities and mandatory ethics training before being allowed to continue her program. Connor and Marcus received academic probation and were barred from human subjects research for 2 years. Priya's educational psychology program required additional ethical oversight of her future work. Emma faced the lightest consequences but had voluntarily withdrawn from the anthropology program, apparently unable to face the professional shame of her actions being exposed. The university wants to use your case as a teaching example, Dr. Chin explained. With your permission, they'd like to develop a training module on research ethics violations and graduate student collaborations. Maya considered the irony. The inner circle had wanted to present her as a research subject in their academic showcase. Instead, she would be featured as a case study in research misconduct prevention, though this time with full informed consent and appropriate ethical oversight. I think that would be valuable, Maya agreed. Other students should understand both how manipulation works and how to recognize when they're being treated as research subjects rather than research colleagues. The personal costs had been significant but manageable. Maya had lost what she'd thought was a friend group, but she'd gained something more valuable: clarity about her own worth and agency. The loneliness was real, but it was honest loneliness rather than the false belonging she'd experienced with the inner circle. More importantly, she discovered that she was capable of sophisticated social analysis and strategic response when her emotional needs weren't clouding her judgment. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also been educational in ways that would strengthen both her research and her personal relationships going forward. The academic community's response had been mixed, but generally supportive. Some whispered about Maya's role in her own manipulation, questioning why someone studying social psychology hadn't recognized the signs sooner. But most faculty members and graduate students recognized the ethical violations and supported her decision to report them. Dr. Chen had been particularly insightful about the psychological dynamics involved. Victims of manipulation often blame themselves for not recognizing the deception, she'd explained. But emotional manipulation works precisely because it targets genuine human needs for connection and belonging. Intelligence doesn't protect against loneliness, and academic knowledge doesn't immunize us against having our psychological vulnerabilities exploited. Maya's research had also benefited from the experience. Her dissertation on social manipulation now included a powerful case study of academic manipulation among graduate students, with herself as both researcher and subject. The complexity of the perspective would make her work stand out in a field often criticized for theoretical abstraction divorced from lived experience. 6 months after the confrontation at Brewster's, Maya received an unexpected message from Emma Jo. The former anthropology student had transferred to a social work program at another university and wanted to make amends. They met at a neutral coffee shop, and Emma's apology was thoughtful and comprehensive. She acknowledged the harm caused, took responsibility for her role in the manipulation, and explained how the experience had changed her understanding of ethical research practices. I kept telling myself we were conducting legitimate research, Emma admitted. But really, we were just being cruel to someone who trusted us. I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize that. Maya appreciated the apology while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Forgiveness was possible, but renewed friendship wasn't. The trust required for genuine relationship had been too thoroughly violated. The conversation did provide closure, though, and helped Maya understand how intelligent people could rationalize harmful behavior when it served their academic and social interests. The insights would prove valuable for her future research on institutional manipulation and power dynamics. A year after the initial confrontation, Maya successfully defended her dissertation and accepted a postdoctoral fellowship in research ethics and social psychology. Her work on academic manipulation had gained attention from ethics boards and psychology departments across the country, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities. She'd also developed genuine friendships with other graduate students, relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than calculated manipulation. The connections felt different from what she'd experienced with the inner circle, less intense perhaps, but more authentic and sustainable. Maya never returned to Brewster's coffee shop, but she often thought about the lessons learned there. The experience had taught her that belonging built on deception was ultimately hollow, that authentic relationships required risk and vulnerability, and that her academic training could be both a vulnerability and a strength depending on how she applied it. Most importantly, she learned that being someone's research subject without consent was a violation of human dignity, but being someone's friend by choice was a gift worth protecting. Dr. Maya Chin stood before a packed auditorium at the American Psychological Association's annual conference, delivering the keynote address on research ethics in academic communities. Her work on institutional manipulation and graduate-student power dynamics had established her as a leading expert in a field that desperately needed attention. The audience included many of her former professors from Northwestern, colleagues from her current position at a respected research university, and graduate students eager to learn about ethical research practices. Maya had transformed from research subject to research leader, using her experience as the foundation for meaningful academic contribution. During the Q&A session, a young graduate student raised her hand with a question that brought Maya full circle. Dr. Chun, how do you recommend students protect themselves from being manipulated by their peers while still remaining open to genuine academic collaboration? Maya smiled, remembering her own naive vulnerability and the painful education that had followed. Trust is essential for academic community, she replied, but so is maintaining your analytical perspective. Pay attention to whether collaborators treat you as a whole person or as a resource to be managed. Notice whether relationships feel reciprocal or extractive. And remember that genuine academic friendship enhances your work without requiring you to change fundamental aspects of who you are. She paused, thinking of curly hair that had once been a source of shame and was now simply part of her professional presentation. Most importantly, understand that your psychological vulnerabilities, loneliness, desire for belonging, imposter syndrome, are part of the human experience, not personal failings to be exploited. Ethical colleagues will support you through these challenges, not weaponize them for their own advancement. After the presentation, Maya walked through the conference halls, noting the genuine conversations and collaborative energy of academic community at its best. She'd found her place in this world, not by changing herself to fit others' expectations, but by understanding her own value and insisting that others recognize it too. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chun, now a close colleague and friend. Brilliant presentation. Dinner at 7 to celebrate? Maya typed back, perfect. And thanks for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. As she walked toward the conference exit, Maya caught her reflection in the glass doors. Her curly hair framed her face naturally. Her clothes reflected her personal style rather than others' preferences, and her expression showed the confidence of someone who'd learned to trust her own judgment. She looked like herself, finally, authentically, unapologetically. The girl who'd been desperate for acceptance would always be part of her story, but she was no longer the whole story. Maya had become the researcher, the teacher, the colleague, and the friend she'd always had the potential to be, once she'd learned the difference between belonging and manipulation, between friendship and exploitation. Behind her, the conference continued with its presentations and networking, its genuine collaborations, and unfortunately inevitable political maneuvering. Academic community would always be imperfect, filled with human beings pursuing knowledge while navigating their own psychological complexities and professional pressures. But Maya now knew how to distinguish between the colleagues who would enhance her work and those who would exploit her vulnerabilities. She'd learned to value herself enough to insist on authentic relationships, even if that meant accepting loneliness over false belonging. The social experiment was over. Maya's real life, built on genuine connections, ethical research practices, and hard-won self-knowledge, was just beginning. In her hotel room that evening, Maya opened her laptop and began drafting her next research proposal. The title read, From Subject to Scientist, Personal Agency in Academic Community Building. She smiled as she typed, thinking of all the graduate students who might read her work and recognize their own experiences, their own worth, their own power to choose relationships that enhanced rather than exploited their humanity. The research would continue, but this time, Maya would be the one asking the questions.